as I mentioned, Beth Ridley, one of our OG culture geeks, been with us since the very beginning. Beth is a corporate executive turned leadership and workplace culture consultant, speaker, author, and the CEO of Ridley Consulting Group. Beth combines 30 years of global leadership and management consulting experience with expertise in inclusive leadership and positive psychology to help organizations strengthen leaders, teams, and workplace cultures. Her work has been featured in national publications, and she frequently appears on television and delivers keynotes at events like CultureCon around the world. Beth holds a BA in English Literature from the University of Virginia, an MA in International Relations from Tufts University, and an MBA from Columbia University. She's lived in London, Tokyo, Johannesburg, and Bangkok, and now she resides in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with her husband and 3 children. Beth, thanks again for being here today.
Milwaukee, the best city. Thanks, Zach. I know exactly. And, only second to Madison. I love Madison as well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Zach, thank you so much for the opportunity. And actually, I just want to thank you and Nick for even creating this whole CultureCon community. It is so important for people like us, workplace culture advocates and practitioners, to have a place where we can come together and share best practices and honestly just inspire one another, because sometimes the work can be hard. And yeah, we were reflecting on it. I did attend my first CultureCon when I got the courage to leave my corporate job to start my own consulting practice 6 years ago. And really the whole focus of my consulting has really been like, how do we help teams continue to deliver at a really high level of performance without the burnout? And I've really been sort of obsessed with that challenge for one interesting reason. Shortly before I left my corporate job, someone shared this slide with me. And Mika, if you want to tee up my first slide. And just as a side note, I think I'm the only presenter who couldn't get my slides to work myself. And so Mika is advancing my slides, and I didn't want it to be awkward, like, next slide, please, next slide, please. So I'm going to do this little hand signal. So if you see me doing that, that's my code for Mika to go to the next slide. But anyways, I was introduced to this challenge in the workplace, which is called the Productivity Wellbeing Dilemma. And basically it sort of measures every year to what extent do people feel that they're actually working harder than the year before. And right now it's 77%. So if you poll people, 77% will say, yes, I do feel like I'm doing more, I'm working harder, more challenge at work, trying to rise to the occasion. And then it also looks at, but at what cost? Do you feel like you're thriving in your life? And as you can see, it's 39%. And that gap actually every year keeps getting wider and wider between the percentage of people who are claim to be working harder and the percentage of people who feel like they're thriving. And to me, that's just so unsustainable. And I really wanted to work in that space to figure out, how do we close that gap? How do we create workplaces where people rise to the occasion consistently, but without sacrificing their health and their energy? And I do think that this is a question that we're starting to ask more seriously across many organizations. About 85% of employees are burned out or at the risk of feeling burned out, and it's costly. So the residual impact of burnout is turnover, disengagement, absenteeism, incivility. You're probably hearing about all these trends that are increasing in the workforce. And again, there's costs associated with that. So I would say over the past, 5 years or so, I've been experimenting with clients who will let me to pilot and try different things around what does it actually take to close that gap. We all want to be operating at a high level of performance for sure, but again, not at the expense of burnout. So my goal today in terms of what I want to cover are just what I've observed and tried through my practice so far. So I want to talk about, the patterns that I see that are working among high performing teams and those teams that are able to operate at a high level of performance consistently. and just to understand where are they investing their time, what are they prioritizing, and how are they sustaining their results over the long term. Like I said, I've been piloting some approaches. I really wanted to package those patterns that I've been observing, and how do we make it repeatable and scalable across teams. So I've had a couple of pilots that are going. So I want to share with you what I've packaged, what I've piloted, and what's worked, what hasn't, and the lessons learned to date. And then I also want to give you a little tool that you can use and take back into your organizations to give what I've been piloting a whirl in your own organizations, and let me know how it goes. I do want to be really transparent that I feel like this is very much a journey for me. Actually, sorry, Mika, back to the previous slide. This is a journey for me versus a finished product. So in the spirit of, transparency and vulnerability, and coming to the CultureCon community without something fully baked, it's a work in progress. Like I said, I've got things that I've tried and results to share, but I do want feedback. I do want your input. I want to be in conversation around this with all of you who I know are also working in this space. So you'll see that I have a QR code, and it's just to scan so you can provide your anonymous feedback. I thought that might be a more streamlined way than using chat. Also, it'll be anonymous, so you won't hurt my feelings, but I want your honest opinion as I'm sort of unfolding this. Do share with me like what's resonating, what's not resonating. What have you tried? Any insights that you want to share? It's just an open feedback, and I can collect those responses. It'll really help me. But also I will be taking questions as I go. So I'll pause and make sure I'm checking in for questions. Certainly you can put your questions in chat. Mika, maybe if you could help me monitor those as well, and I'll save time for questions at the end. But anyways, if there's things on your mind as this is unfolding, please use the QR code and go ahead and post your thoughts anonymously. I'd really greatly appreciate that, since we're in this community together. Okay, Mika, officially. Signal. Next slide. Thanks. Okay, so the first thing that I want to just share in terms of my observations of patterns of high-performing teams really comes from the time that I spent working as a management consultant for Booz Allen Hamilton, a very large management consulting firm. I was based in their New York office, and we got dropped into the largest companies to really help them with strategies in all aspects of their business. So as a consultant, it's really easy to get sort of the vibe and the take on the culture really right away. You notice things right away, just in terms of how people are interacting. And I could always tell which companies would be successful with implementing the strategies that we developed with them and which wouldn't. And it really came down to human interaction. Was there a sense that people could share their ideas openly without fear, debate, discuss, talk about what's not going well, and learn from that? Or there were cultures where you could tell, it was kind of stifled conversation. The only time people spoke up, which is to double down on what maybe the most senior person in the room had to say. And so that always left an impression on me in terms of like what made good companies versus great companies. And to me, it really came down to the seriousness with which they invested in their human capital. So all companies are making investments, but really great companies and mature companies are starting to make a more intentional investment in their human capital and not just their capital. So I tried to create sort of replicating Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that, sort of the hierarchy of human capital investment. That is one factor, one pattern that I've noticed that sets, average organizations apart from great organizations. So let me just unpack this a little bit. So all organizations, all companies are producing something, right? It's either a product or a service. So their first level of investment is really just in that, either, focusing on the output and the delivery of their product or their service. At the next level, at a minimum, you really want to streamline that output, streamline the delivery. So the investment is really more around training, tools, technology. Of course, there's a people component to it, but it's not really centering the people. It's more centering the process that enables the people to do their job better. And I would say, obviously most companies who want to, be in business need to do that. And through, process enablement, you gain clarity and the necessary processes to drive efficiency and reliable results. All right, well, good companies take a step further. And this is where you really start to think about the human aspect of your capital and really thinking about what is it that's going to keep our workforce so that we've got that stability. And only through stability do you get the conditions for continuous improvement. You need people who've been there long enough to appreciate what's working, what's not, and to keep improving. And this is where, you've got more built out HR teams that are really investing in, I would say, those external things that motivate people to stay in your organization. So obviously compensation, pay and benefits, some type of performance management so that people appreciate like what it takes to be a good contributor to the organization, and then professional development to support growth and learning. But what I've noticed is it's the investment in actual intrinsic motivation, those inherent human needs that we all have that intrinsically motivate us to want to show up and provide that discretionary effort beyond just what I need to do in my job, and really adopting more of an owner mindset. And that's where you really unlock high performance at a consistent level. You need that discretionary effort that can only come from intrinsic motivation. And that's investing in programs that promote, holistic well-being, inclusion and belonging, recognition, as an example. So that was really my first observation at the organizational level. And I know I'm talking to a lot of culture enthusiasts on here, so I don't need to show you the data, but the data also supports this. Organizations that do invest in meeting human needs that drive intrinsic motivation outperform on every metric. I did have a slide in there that showed that, but then I thought, oh yeah, I'm preaching to the choir. But anyways, so I left management consulting for the big firm. I went into corporate. I was at Northwestern Mutual in progressive leadership roles for 12 years. But at some point, I actually just wanted to strike out on my own in the consulting world. And when I, wanted to kind of pick where I wanted to play, I knew I wanted to be at that upper echelon, working with great companies on addressing the human needs that drive intrinsic motivation. That's really where I wanted to play. And so I started consulting around all things concerning that, heavy emphasis on inclusion and belonging, but touched well-being, recognition, and those other things as well. The interesting thing that I learned is only great companies are hiring workplace culture consultants because they've already decided it's worth the investment. And so it's like they also know to be great, you can't just invest in it once. It's a continual investment. So I have the luxury and the pleasure of actually working for great companies because they're the only ones who are hiring me. But then what I started to notice once I got embedded in some of these companies, that greatness is also uneven. And it really comes down to sort of the team level. Teams, even in a great company, were operating at different levels of greatness. And so I really wanted to unpack, like, okay, even at the upper echelon of greatness, like what makes great teams in great companies sustainably great? And the nice thing about working in great companies is that they have me do stay interviews. And stay interviews are interviews to, talk to your top talent. Why do they stay? And to get to get ahead of that so you can be proactive to keep them. Good companies are doing exit interviews, which is, the opportunity to keep great talent is gone, but at least you're learning something and you can be more responsive. But anyways, I've had the the pleasure of doing a lot of stay interviews and having thousands of conversations of top talent in great companies to find out why they stay. And here's what I've learned, which are other inputs into sort of how I want to harness what works well to make it scalable and repeatable. So the first thing that I learned is I have 99% because there was one person who didn't fit the trend, but almost all top performers, when I asked, have you considered leaving recently? The answer was yes. The answer was yes. Leaders and managers need to know people are always looking, especially top performers, because they know what they're worth. There was only one person out of like 1,000, so that's why I said 99%, who said no, never. But that was the outlier. Everyone else always has their eye on a better opportunity. Again, top talent knows what they're worth. The second learning that I gained is that culture is always the number one reason why they stay. So when I say, okay, why haven't you left? It's never, well, the compensation or the benefits. We're assuming that those are fair, to the market, right? So it was always culture. And people would tell me I would only leave if I could be assured I'm actually going to get more money, better compensation, and at least the same great culture. But people are generally not willing to take that risk. So then when I dig a little bit deeper, great culture, yes, of course, that's no surprise, but describe that great culture. And what they always say are really the smallest, littlest, mundane things that are super tangible in everyday ways that they take note of, that leave an impression. It's things like, my manager always gives me timely, constructive feedback. My employees always remember my birthday. The CEO knows my name and says good morning in the elevator. It's the littlest things. It was never those big, policies, programs, retreats, or initiatives. I mean, even though great companies are investing in wellness programs, recognition platforms, I mean, it really is those one-on-ones, interpersonal engagements, and it's not anything major or big. It's the little things. Occasionally I'll do exit interviews as well, which I really don't like to do because they're so depressing, because it's almost the opposite of this. And when I say, why did you leave? People say the culture and tell me why. And they always say, again, small things. No one said thank you. People didn't even look at me in the hallway. I mean, honestly, heartbreaking and ridiculous, because these are such small things that have such a big impact. Okay, so the point is, this is just not rocket science. This is like easy peasy. Like, why can't we just be kinder and more present to people? And that's a way to invest in a culture and get this amazing ROI with intrinsic motivation. Well, if it were easy, I guess more people would do this. And so then the question is like, why? Why is investing in human needs that motivate people, why is it so rare? And the feedback that I get in my own observations is, a lot of times managers, employees, it's just vague. What motivates people? It seems abstract and it seems soft. And, a lot of managers will be like, yeah, it's important, but you know what? I'm not a therapist. That's not what I was hired to do. So they just stay away. Also, it's hard to measure. I mean, people want to put their effort towards what they know they're going to be graded on or measured against. And if you don't actually have meaningful measures around some of these human needs, it's going to be the one thing that's forgotten. And people, don't want to spend time on something if we can't prove or demonstrate the ROI. And also it's just kind of hard to scale, right? So even in organizations where you've got some managers who it's just their nature, or they've decided it's important for them and they're going to step up and lead this way and set the tone, it's really hard to make that more consistent across teams. So as I started to think, like, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way we can package this for managers and teams, make it easy to invest in these simple human needs, make it turnkey and repeatable. Like, what the heck would that look like? So that's sort of the journey that I've been on, and I want to describe to you what I've packaged and what I've piloted, and then take it from there. I will pause, though, actually first, and just see if you have any questions about anything that I've covered so far, just in terms of my observations of high-performing teams that do it without burning out. And Micah, I don't know if any questions have come into chat. Was that it? No. I'll keep going. Okay, so the first thing that I thought was, if I'm gonna like package and systematize what it takes to invest in human needs in a way that drives performance. Micah, next slide, please. I thought we got to rename it. I mean, people know what a high-performing team is, and they want to drive for high-performing teams, but I think just calling it a high-performing teams sort of puts people back in the traditional mindset of drive for results, and how people feel about it comes second. So I thought, instead of high performance, I want to call it holistic performance. And it's a redefinition of performance that to focus on not just what gets done, but on how people are helped to thrive. Now, this might seem so basic. So like big whip. Okay, yeah. Like, what's the big deal? But I have to tell you, simply introducing a new definition of performance, for some leaders, that's actually all they needed, because they actually never saw themselves as part of my job as a leader is to create the conditions for people to thrive. Now, it might be the industries that I work in. I tend to work in a lot of industries that leaders sort of got to their role because of their subject matter expertise, and they're operating more as maybe project managers or program managers, really making sure that the work gets done. And they never really saw that, yeah, part of my job as a leader is to actually not have all the answers, but to create the environment where people can thrive. So that was a light bulb moment for a lot of people. So redefining it was helpful. But then, of course, that's only part of it, because again, people put their energy towards what they're getting measured on. So part of the work then is making sure that organizationally your performance management system mirrors that balance, right? You're balancing outcome metrics, which are the norm in most organizations, but also meaningfully holding leaders accountable for these culture metrics. And the key word is meaningfully, right? Most organizations will have some type of engagement score. Managers get their engagement score and they're expected to improve upon it. And that's sort of where things fall apart. Other potential culture metrics would be something around well-being. And I personally really like the Net Promoter Score, which is basically asking, would you recommend this organization or even this team as a great place to work to your family and friends? And so even organizations that have this balanced metrics in their performance system, it's hard to get leaders to really step up and figure out, like, what does it take to actually drive engagement? It still seems to be like kind of a puzzle. So I want to make it easy for people. There are probably a bazillion ways to increase engagement or create the environment for people to thrive, but managers don't deal with millions of ways. They sometimes want to be told what to do. And this is what I learned back in my time leading inclusion and belonging at Northwestern Mutual. Even when leaders were on board, like, yes, I understand why inclusion and belonging is great for business and our outcomes, they would always say, but tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. Just tell me what to do. And I was successful when I gave them something really tangible and practical, like one thing. They don't want 10 things. They want one thing that they can do and focus on. So in order to come up with like credible 1 to 3 things, I really wanted to make sure it was anchored in what actually drives intrinsic motivation. So I've been a student of positive psychology, belonging, even the Surgeon General guidelines around a healthy workplace are really good indicators of, at the end of the day, what do all humans need to feel intrinsically motivated? And I tried to boil it down so it didn't feel too woo-woo for managers and really make it tangible and accessible. And I came up with what I call the 3 C's of intrinsic motivation. So C number 1, and these are basically things that I saw that were most common across all this body of research around, again, neuroscience and positive psychology. So number 1 is people need to feel a sense of comfort. Another fancy word for that would be psychological safety. You know, people need to feel it's okay to ask questions, share ideas or concerns, or even just sort of be more of who they are at work without fear or feeling like, I gotta, work hard to fit in. The second C is people actually do need to know and feel that their work has higher meaning and purpose than just a list of tasks. So they really need to feel that your work actually has meaning beyond a paycheck. And then the third C is contribution. Another term for this is mattering. People want to feel like they matter. Their efforts are noticed and appreciated. So those are the 3 things. I figured, look, hey, let me package this and have leaders start there. It's a good place to start. Nothing could go wrong. Research bears that out. If we can fuel those 3 things in humans, we're going to step up and be a lot more motivated, even during challenging times. It helps us to build resilience and that sort of thing. So, well, then it all comes down to, okay, leaders, like, what are the practices or the behaviors, small ones, that you can demonstrate in your day-to-day to invest in that for your people? And this is where I tried a lot of things, and honestly, like fits and starts, probably more fails, or maybe I shouldn't say fails. Things that didn't go as expected that became lessons learned. But here's what I did learn that works when working with leaders to say, okay, could you invest a little bit more in showing up to support those 3 C's on your teams? And the first thing that I realized is I cannot leave leaders out there on their own. I know leaders set the tone and lead by example, yes. And you got to engage the rest of the team. It's too much of a lift just for leaders to do this. They start to feel abandoned, alone. They start to wonder, is any of it mattering, working? It seems to work better and get a lot more traction when you engage both managers and their team members, and there's a lot more shared accountability there. The second lesson learned is, these got to be small things. I think initially people were like, oh, we're going to do a retreat or this or that, and they were big things, and they did it once and they never followed up. These have to be micro habits, to the point where they actually just become woven into your existing workflows, so that they actually just become new team traditions. So the guidelines that I gave people to think of these habits that you can practice to invest in the 3 C's, it had to be something that you could do daily, weekly at the most, something that could fit into existing workflows. So think either huddles, team meetings, one-on-ones. If you don't have any of those, then it had to be some type of group chat or something like that. And it could not take more than 10 minutes on the top end. It had to be really short. And again, people are busy. They don't want one more thing to do. So it had to really fit into existing workflows enough until it just became a new tradition. And then the third thing is, still at the end of the day, it's new and people don't want to waste their time. We had to link these new human needs behaviors directly to some type of business improvement goal and track both simultaneously. And that started to eliminate this question of like, oh, when people feel more motivated, does it actually lead to anything? And we could show side by side, well, since we've been taking this action, we've been seeing this result in terms of our business outcomes. So with those best practices and a couple of trial and error things under my belt, I decided to, well, let's give this a whirl, formalize it a little bit, and turn it into just a 90-day sprint, a little bit of a pilot or an experiment, just to see if we followed these steps. And Micah, you can just build out all these slides. So it was really 4 steps. 1, do a quick pulse check to identify which of the 3 human needs felt the weakest, where was the biggest opportunity for improvement. And I used just 1 question for each of the pulse checks, and they were the questions that I teed up when I presented the 3 C's. Keep it short, sweet, simple. This cannot be complicated. As a team, come together. They've got 1 hour to discuss the results, to come up with 1 team habit tied to their existing routines, and at the same time identify with our discretionary effort, if we can feel more motivated, what is a business outcome that we'd like to also track. So they had to also identify a business KPI. They had to just make sure that they had intentional time to review monthly. Are we still taking action? If not, why not? What can we adjust? If so, how's it going? Anything to modify? And at the end, track both their results against the original question baseline around the 3 C's to see what improved and match it with their KPI. That's why I packaged and I piloted it with a couple of trusting clients who were willing to give it a whirl. And I'm going to walk through 3 case studies just to show what they came up with, what they did, and how things are going so far. So the next slide is a manufacturing client. They actually it's hard to explain, but they press stuff out of metal. They would hate that I describe it that way, but something like that. So the pain point that they were discovering is that they were really having a lot of high turnover. It started first with people just being late to the job, and then a lot of high turnover. And when they were asking people well, where are you going? What's your new job? It would be something like a gig economy, I'm going to go deliver DoorDash or Uber Eats. So it was almost yeah, this job is just a paycheck. I can earn money doing anything. So we thought, and also the survey showed connection was lacking. People just didn't think their job added up to more than just a paycheck. So the team got together, and the manager, and the new team habit that they tried, they called it Parts with Purpose. And so at the beginning of every huddle, they have morning huddles, they talk about safety and everything like that, but somebody comes and actually physically shows a part that they've worked on or will be working on. And they talk about the end use of it, which they never really talked about before. So sometimes it went to tractors, and they could talk about how, this tractor, does a lot of work in the Midwest, and it's harvest season. So, that's really important. Sometimes there are parts that go into hospital equipment, and they can talk about how it's used for that. And people found it just, kind of interesting. And it was a connection that you couldn't necessarily get with DoorDash. The KPI that they wanted to track was turnover. And so we were sort of checking in quarterly. They saw that after doing this for a little bit, folks just started kind of in a teasing way, talking about language of pride and purpose. Well, I worked on this, and did you know it went to that? My part trumps your part. I mean, they had a little bit of fun with it. They retested their connection score again, and it increased by 28%. But within a year, a little bit more than a year, to be honest, they saw that turnover reduced. And that actually saved a lot of money, probably around $300,000, just stemming turnover by that little bit. Okay, I want to hurry up. because I want to get to questions. Okay, so the next one is, oopsie, I think you have to back up one, Micah. I believe, yeah, okay. So a bank, their pain point that they thought, could this be an issue of motivation? I don't know, let's give this a try. And it was just kind of like, people were just doing enough. I mean, it wasn't bad, but how do banks distinguish themselves? It has to be through customer service. And people just weren't like going above and beyond. They weren't really taking ownership for customer service. They're polite, but they weren't doing much more than that. So this one became challenging. They didn't really have a lot of like team meetings or anything like that, where it could be like a daily team event. So they decided that at the end of the day, they were just going to have everybody just jot down really brief. Everybody got a journal, but just to jot down, who did you help today? Like one way that you made someone's life easier today. And it could be the smallest thing. And it was small things. It was like, well, I gave somebody a compliment and she smiled. Or, I actually went and got a deposit ticket for someone because they couldn't find theirs, like the smallest things. But then when they did meet, they would just share those really briefly, weekly. And again, sort of kindness begets kindness, customer service begets customer service. When peers see that other people are trying, they try. And it just sort of sparked this feeling of goodwill and, again, more ownership and accountability around customer service. The KPI that they wanted to ultimately track was, how often could we actually resolve any issues that come up in the first interaction versus, okay, now I got to get the manager, or I'll get back to you, or whatever. So initially, they just started to create more awareness of, small things actually do have an impact. They do look at customer feedback survey pretty regularly, and they started to see more words like easy to work with, really helpful. And then their ultimate KPI did increase and tick up. So again, discretionary effort, how do you squeeze it out? You're not going to pay people more. You probably are doing all you can on the benefits. It comes down to intrinsic motivation. Okay, so then the last example, this one is, okay, so I wanted to give sort of like professional service firm example. So this one, their pain point was, this is a bunch of engineers. They actually do the engineering design that goes into making heavy machinery, a lot of like cranes and big tractors and big stuff. And they were experiencing like scope creep in terms of the delivery of their designs, because there's a lot of different engineering groups that have to be involved to get to the finished product. And they were noticing from one engineering design team to the next, there would be things that didn't work. So it would have to go back to the beginning of the line again to work out. The handoffs were showing just a lot of like, the puzzle pieces weren't coming together. Again, is this a training issue? Like, what is it? They discovered that their human need was, they really didn't have psychological safety. And maybe in this profession, just people felt like, look, I should know what I'm doing. I don't want to ask questions. I don't want to appear that I, don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to sort of muscle through and figuring it out. But again, it caused like a lot of rework. This was a more challenging one to sort of figure out. They tried a couple of habits that just weren't clicking, and the one that seemed to resonate, that get traction, they came up with needs and wants. So they just sort of normalized asking for help. So at the end of their meetings, they would always do a round, and everyone had to share either a need or a want. Something that they need a second opinion, maybe, or I need another way of doing this, or I want someone to review, or something. It just sort of normalized asking for help. The KPI they tracked was, again, with those handoffs, the number of projects that didn't require to adjust the scope or schedule changes, because it was a little bit more smooth through the process. And they started to notice that people were becoming a lot more comfortable raising risks earlier, asking for help without fear of judgment, the engineers loved this because they felt like they actually didn't have to spend as much time reworking. And then ultimately with their KPI, 25% more design issues were caught before the handoffs. Okay, I'm gonna pause there because then I just have a couple of things I want to wrap up. But I feel like I've thrown a lot out there, but I wanted to give you an appreciation for how I got to where I was, what I've tried, the small successes, small wins. But any questions or comments thus far? And please also don't forget to, Mika, while we're waiting for questions, can you go back to my slide that had the agenda and the QR code? Because if anybody has something that you want to share, but you don't want to share it in this group, the QR code is an easy, anonymous way to do that. Thank you. Oops, yep, go back. I think the one, yeah, thank you. Okay, so any questions? Will I see them in chat if there are any questions?
Yes, it's going to be at the audience chat.
Oh, I think I'm in audience chat. Yeah, I don't see any questions. Okay. Is this making sense to people? Okay, so what I want to leave you with then is, Mika, do you mind going to slide 17? Okay, so I'm going to give you a complimentary one-pager that basically just condenses everything that I talked about and gives you the step-by-step of how you can do the 90-day sprint in your own organization. Here it is. Oops, yep, one back. Yeah, you do got to scan the QR code to get that. And you can download it right away. But what I'd love for you to do is to try it. Experiment with, is there an area where we could do better to achieve high performance status, but instead of demanding people do more, sending them to more training, assuming that it's a skill issue or a will issue, what if we invested in a motivation issue and unleashed that intrinsic motivation for people to want to step up in a way where it sort of catches fire and it becomes the new norm of operating. So that's what I laid out, the 4 steps for you in a little template to capture what you're doing, what you're learning, wins along the way. And in exchange, I would love for you to email me and schedule a time so I can hear how it went for you. What worked, what didn't work, what needs to be modified, because then we can learn together. I can share more insights in terms of my experimentation around this, but I can also learn a lot from you. With that, yeah, leave that up there for one more second, Mika, so people can scan the QR code. I invite any questions or feedback that anybody may have. If not, Mika, the next slide, my last slide. Thank you. Do get in touch with me if anything resonated, if it's like, hey, this feels a lot like what I'm doing, I want to collaborate. The need is humongous. Like I said, 85% of employees in a state of burnout, on the brink. The gap between employees feeling like they're working harder, and by the way, that's at all levels, from CEO on down, to not feeling like they're thriving, like this is a huge space that we all need to be playing in if we're going to turn the tide. So I'm doing my little piece that I shared, but again, there's power in numbers and the collaboration and amplifying. So I do ask you to reach out to me directly, connect with me on LinkedIn, and let's definitely keep this conversation going, and very open to any collaboration opportunities as well.